March 15, 2019. Special Agent Marcus Rivera had been sealed inside shipping crate 4471B for 14 hours when he heard footsteps approaching. His radio was dead, his backup was compromised, and somewhere in the darkness of El Chapo's Long Beach warehouse, his partner Elena was screaming. Marcus pressed his eye to the ventilation slit and watched 3 men drag a bloodied figure across the concrete floor. The figure wasn't moving. The screaming had stopped. That's when he made the choice that would destroy everything. Marcus Rivera stayed hidden in that crate while his partner died 20 feet away. He told himself it was protocol. He told himself it was survival. He told himself a lot of things in the years that followed. But tonight, 3 years later, Elena's wedding ring sits on his kitchen table, and the note underneath says she's coming home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rivera's hand trembled as he reached for the ring. The thin band of white gold caught the overhead light, casting fractured reflections across the scarred oak table. 3 years of sleepless nights, 3 years of Jack Daniels for breakfast, 3 years of telling himself Elena Vasquez was dead, and now this. The Phoenix safe house felt smaller tonight, its reinforced walls pressing inward like the shipping crate that still visited his nightmares. He'd chosen this place specifically for its anonymity, a forgettable ranch house in a forgettable neighborhood where retired federal agents came to disappear. The Bureau had been generous with his pension, considering he'd let his partner die, considering he'd blown a 2-year operation, considering the psychological evaluation that branded him unfit for active duty due to severe PTSD and survivor's guilt. Marcus turned the ring over in his palm. Inside the band, Elena's initials were still visible, Ev Elena Vasquez, the woman who'd trained him on deep cover protocols, who'd taught him how to think like a smuggler, who'd made him laugh even when they were embedded with killers. The woman whose screams he still heard every night at 3 a.m. He set the ring down and unfolded the note again. The handwriting was block letters, anonymous. She never died. She's been watching. Room 47, Palms Motel, Camelback Road. Come alone or your daughter pays. Sarah. His chest constricted. His 19-year-old daughter, who hadn't spoken to him since the divorce, who'd changed her last name to her mother's maiden name, who'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with the man who'd fallen apart after Long Beach, the man who'd chosen the bottle over his family. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to Sarah's number. When was the last time he'd called her? Christmas? Her birthday? The gaps in his memory were getting wider, carved out by whiskey and guilt. He pressed call. Straight to voicemail. Her voice bright and young. Hey, this is Sarah. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. Probably. Sarah, it's Dad. Call me back as soon as you get this. Don't go anywhere alone tonight. I mean it. Call me. He hung up and stared at the phone, waiting. Nothing. The secure landline on the kitchen counter rang once, sharp and piercing. Only 3 people had that number: his handler, his therapist, and the pizza place that had somehow gotten hold of it. Marcus grabbed the receiver. Rivera. Still answering your phone like a Fed. The voice was electronically distorted, gender indeterminate. That's disappointing. Who is this? Someone who was in that warehouse. Someone who remembers what really happened that night. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Elena's dead. You saw what you were meant to see. Just like tonight, you'll do exactly what you're meant to do. A pause. Check your email. The line went dead. Marcus opened his laptop, fingers moving on muscle memory through VPN connections and encrypted email accounts he hadn't accessed in months. One new message, sender blocked, no subject line. The attachment was a video file. 30 seconds of grainy surveillance footage showing his daughter walking across a college campus, backpack slung over one shoulder. Timestamp, today, 4:47 p.m. A red circle highlighted the figure following her, a man in a baseball cap, face obscured. The video ended with a freeze frame, Sarah entering her dorm building, completely unaware of the shadow behind her. Marcus slammed the laptop shut. His service weapon was upstairs, locked in the bedroom safe alongside his badge and the commendation letter he'd never opened. 3 years of telling himself he was done with the life, done with the violence, done with the choices that got good people killed. But Sarah wasn't part of that world. Sarah was innocent. He climbed the stairs, each step a movement away from the safe, numb existence he'd built. The Glock felt foreign in his hand after so long, heavier than he remembered. He checked the clip, 15 rounds of federal hollow points, enough to kill whoever was playing games with his daughter's life. The Palms Motel was a 20-minute drive through Phoenix's arterial sprawl. Marcus had surveilled the place before, back when he'd first arrived in the city. Old habit, catalog every bolt hole, every safe house, every place the past might catch up with you. Room 47 faced the parking lot, single exit, no rear window access. As he drove through the desert night, Marcus tried to reconcile the impossible equation in his head. Elena was dead. He'd seen her body dragged across that concrete floor. He'd listened to her die while he cowered in a shipping crate. But he'd never seen her face in the darkness. And Elena Vasquez had been the best undercover agent he'd ever known. Skilled enough to fake her own death, patient enough to wait 3 years for revenge. The ring on his passenger seat caught the streetlights as he pulled into the motel parking lot. Room 47's lights were on. If Elena was truly alive, Marcus was walking into a trap 3 years in the making. If she was dead, someone else was using her memory to destroy what remained of his life. Either way, his daughter was in danger. And that made the choice simple. Marcus Rivera checked his weapon one last time and walked toward the light. 47, his hand hovering near the Glock beneath his jacket. The motel's neon sign buzzed overhead, casting intermittent pink shadows across the cracked asphalt. Through the thin walls, he could hear a television murmuring in Spanish, some late-night telenovela where someone was always dying for love. For a moment, standing in the sulfur-tinted parking lot, Marcus Rivera wasn't a broken ex-agent walking into an ambush. He was just a father, a man who'd once coached Little League on Saturdays, who'd taught Sarah how to change a tire when she turned 16, who'd slow danced with his wife in their kitchen while dinner burned on the stove, before Long Beach, before Elena, before everything he touched turned to ash. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Sarah, at 8 years old, gap-toothed and fearless, demanding he teach her the secret agent stuff. She'd fashioned a badge from cardboard and aluminum foil, appointed herself his partner. They'd spent an entire afternoon surveilling the neighbor's cat, building an elaborate case file about Mrs. Henderson's suspicious pet. Sarah had taken notes in purple crayon, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Promise me something, Daddy," she'd said as they sat in their surveillance vehicle, the old swing set in their backyard. "Promise you'll always be one of the good guys." He'd kissed her forehead, tasting the strawberry chapstick she'd stolen from her mother. "I promise, Mia, always." The lie had seemed so innocent then. Marcus blinked away the memory and focused on the present. Room 47's curtains were drawn, but light leaked around the edges. No movement inside that he could detect. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few rust-eaten sedans, a motorcycle with California plates, a panel van that could hide a surveillance team or a body. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Second thoughts? Your daughter doesn't have that luxury." Attached was another photo. Sarah in her dorm room, visible through the window. She was sitting on her bed, textbooks spread around her, completely unaware that someone was watching from the darkness outside. The timestamp was 20 minutes ago. Marcus's vision tunneled. Sarah had his ex-wife's delicate features, but his own stubborn jaw. Even in the grainy surveillance photo, he could see she was biting her lower lip, the same nervous habit she'd had since childhood, the one that appeared whenever she was stressed about exams or boys or her father's increasingly erratic phone calls. He'd missed so much. Her high school graduation because he'd been too drunk to drive. Her acceptance to college because he'd been in a mandatory therapy session, staring at the ceiling while Dr. Reeves asked about his coping mechanisms. 3 years of Sarah growing into a young woman, while he measured his days in empty bottles and sleepless nights. The worst part wasn't the guilt, it was the relief. Some dark corner of his soul had been grateful for the excuse to disappear. Grateful he wouldn't have to explain why he woke up screaming Elena's name. Grateful Sarah wouldn't see him flinch every time a shipping truck passed their house. Grateful his failure as a father was less devastating than his failure as a partner, but now someone was using that failure against him. someone who knew exactly which wounds to press. Marcus approached the door, noting the fresh scratches around the lock. Picked recently, probably within the hour. Professional work. Elena had always been good with locks, her slender fingers as skilled with tension wrenches as they were with her service weapon. During their undercover training, she'd broken into his hotel room 6 times just to leave coffee and pastries on his nightstand. "Never let your guard down," she'd written on the napkins. "Even with the people you trust. Especially with the people you trust." The scent of desert sage drifted across the parking lot. Carried on the warm October wind, it reminded him of the night they'd first kissed, 2 years into their partnership, both of them too deep in their cover identities to remember where the lies ended and the truth began. Elena had tasted like cinnamon gum and dangerous decisions. She'd pulled back after a moment, her dark eyes serious. "This complicates things," she'd whispered. "Everything's already complicated, not like this, not when we're living someone else's life." She'd been right, of course. Elena was always right. The kiss had been the beginning of the end, the crack in their professional armor that would eventually let the darkness in. Love made you vulnerable. Love made you careless. Love got your partner killed while you hid in a metal box like a coward. Marcus reached for the door handle, then stopped. If Elena was alive, this moment would shatter everything he'd built his grief upon. If she was dead, he was walking into his daughter's funeral. Either way, the man who emerged from room 47 wouldn't be the same one who'd spent 3 years dying in a Phoenix safe house. He turned the handle and stepped into the light. The door swung open into darkness deeper than the desert night. Marcus stepped across the threshold, his hand instinctively moving to the Glock beneath his jacket. The room smelled wrong, not the usual cocktail of disinfectant and despair that permeated cheap motels, but something else, something that made his pulse spike with recognition. Vanilla and gunpowder. Elena's perfume mixed with the metallic tang of weapons oil. "Close the door, Marcus." The voice came from the shadows near the window, unfiltered now, achingly familiar. 3 years of phantom conversations, of hearing her laugh in crowded restaurants, of turning toward strangers on the street because their silhouette resembled hers, and now she was real. She was here. Marcus's hand froze on the light switch. "Elena, you sound disappointed. Were you hoping I was dead?" He forced himself to move deeper into the room, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. She sat in the chair by the window, backlit by the motel sign's intermittent glow. Same dark hair, though shorter now. Same dangerous grace in the way she held herself. But there were differences. A scar along her jawline that hadn't been there before. A hardness in her posture that spoke of 3 years spent in darker places than his safe house. "I saw you die," Marcus said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "I heard—" "You heard what I needed you to hear." Elena leaned forward, and the pink neon caught the edge of her face. "You were always too emotional, Marcus. Too quick to believe what you wanted to believe." The words hit him like a physical blow. The warehouse. "Jesus Christ, Elena, do you know what I've been living with? The guilt? The nightmares?" "Good." Her voice was winter cold. "You should have guilt. You should have nightmares." Marcus's world tilted. The woman in the chair wasn't the partner who'd brought him coffee in evidence rooms during long surveillance shifts. This wasn't the Elena who'd held his hand when his father died, who'd covered for him when his drinking started affecting his work, who'd whispered his name in that hotel room in Juarez when they'd crossed every line the Bureau had drawn. This was someone else, someone who'd been forged in the same darkness that had broken him. "Sarah," he said. "Where is she?" "Safe. For now." Elena stood, and he could see she was favoring her left leg, another souvenir from that night in Long Beach. "That depends entirely on how cooperative you're willing to be. What do you want?" "Justice." The word hung between them like a blade. "You destroyed a 2-year operation, Marcus. You got 17 federal agents compromised. You handed El Chapo's entire West Coast network to his competitors, and you did it all because you couldn't handle the pressure." "That's not—" Marcus stopped. The details were flooding back now, the pieces he'd been too drunk and too broken to examine properly. "The leak. You're saying I was the leak?" "I'm not saying it. I'm stating it as fact." Elena pulled something from her pocket, a small digital recorder. Your handler's voice. October 15, 2020. 3 hours before the warehouse raid. She pressed play. Through the speaker came the unmistakable cadence of Assistant Director Brooks. Rivera's having another breakdown. Drinking again. I think he's compromised. Pull the plug on Deep Harbor before he gets someone killed. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. That's not... I never broke operational security. No? Then explain how Carlos Mendoza knew we were coming. Explain how he knew exactly which shipping container you'd be hiding in. Explain how he knew your real name, Marcus, because he whispered it in my ear while his men worked me over. The room spun. Marcus reached for the wall, his legs suddenly unreliable. He remembered that night in fragments. The container, the sounds, the smell of blood and fear. But he'd blocked out so much, let the whiskey wash away the details that hurt too much to examine. Elena, I swear to you, I never... Your phone, Marcus. Your personal cell phone. The one you used to call Sarah after particularly bad nights. The one that was supposed to be clean. Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Cartel hackers are very good at their jobs. Every drunk dial to your daughter, every slurred conversation with your ex-wife, every breakdown you had in the privacy of your car, it all went through compromised networks. The truth hit him like a wrecking ball. His daughter's voice, bright and young, asking about his work during their increasingly rare conversations. His ex-wife's concerned questions about his assignments. His own whispered confessions to empty rooms, spoken aloud to process the fear and guilt of deep cover work. They used my family against me, he whispered. They used your weakness against all of us. Elena tucked the recorder away. And now it's time to pay the bill. Marcus staggered backward until the motel room wall stopped him. The cheap paneling felt rough against his shoulders, a small anchor in a world that had just shifted off its axis. 3 years. 3 years of believing he was a victim, a survivor, a broken man trying to rebuild himself from the wreckage of that night. But he wasn't the victim at all. He was the villain. No, he said, but the word came out strangled. I would never... Sarah was just a kid. I wouldn't have put her in danger. Elena tilted her head, studying him with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Wouldn't you? You put her in danger every time you called her drunk. Every time you sobbed into the phone about how hard your job was, how scared you were. The cartels don't distinguish between intelligence and self-pity, Marcus. Information is information. He tried to remember those phone calls, but they blurred together in an alcohol-soaked haze. Late nights when the loneliness became unbearable, when he'd needed to hear his daughter's voice just to remember he was still human. Had he really been so careless? So selfish? The answer sat in his chest like a lead weight. Yes, he had been exactly that careless. I need to call my handler, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. Brooks needs to know you're alive. The Bureau thinks you're dead. Your family thinks... Put the phone down. Something in Elena's voice made him freeze. Not the words themselves, but the tone. Flat, empty, final. It was the voice she'd used right before shooting their mark in Tijuana, the one that meant negotiations were over. Elena, we can fix this. Whatever you've been through, whatever happened after the warehouse, we can... Fix this? She laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in a cathedral. You think this is broken, Marcus? You think I need fixing? The pink neon from the window cast half her face in shadow, and for a moment she looked like a stranger. No, not a stranger. Something worse. She looked like the enemy. Where have you been for 3 years? He asked. Learning. Elena moved to the small table by the window, her fingers trailing across something he couldn't see in the darkness. Did you know Carlos Mendoza had a daughter? Sweet girl. 15 years old. She liked horses and American pop music. Her voice carried no emotion at all. She died in the crossfire when the DEA raided his compound 6 months after Long Beach. Bullet to the spine. Took her 4 hours to bleed out. Marcus felt sick. Elena, that's terrible, but what does that have to do with... Everything. She turned back to him, and now he could see what she'd been touching. A manila folder thick with photographs. Do you want to see pictures? Of the other families destroyed by your little breakdown? The wives and children and brothers caught in the war you started when you handed our operation to El Chapo's enemies? I didn't hand them anything. I was compromised, manipulated. You were weak. The words cut through his protests like a scalpel. Weak and selfish, and so desperate for daddy validation that you couldn't see past your own misery. Do you know what my last thought was before they started cutting me? It wasn't about the pain or the fear. It was about how disappointed I was in my partner. Marcus tried to process what she was telling him. Cutting you? But you survived. You're here. Barely. Elena pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing a network of scars across her collarbone. Precise, deliberate marks that spoke of hours, not minutes. 17 hours, Marcus. That's how long they worked on me. 17 hours of asking questions about every federal agent I'd ever met, every safe house I'd ever used, every operational detail I'd ever learned. The room felt like it was shrinking. Did you tell them anything? What do you think? He looked at her face, really looked, and saw the answer in the rigid set of her jaw, the hollow space behind her eyes. Elena Vasquez had been broken down to her component parts and rebuilt into something harder, something that could survive 17 hours of hell without breaking, something that could survive anything. The Bureau declared you dead, he said weakly. The Bureau declared me convenient. Elena opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. Even from across the room, Marcus could see they were surveillance shots, agents, targets, crime scenes. Amazing how quickly they move on when an operation goes sideways. Case closed, agent honored, lessons learned. Very tidy. So you've been watching me. For 3 years you've been planning. She looked up from the photographs, and her smile was absolutely terrifying. Did you really think you could retire to Phoenix and drink yourself to death in peace? Did you think the families you destroyed would just forget? That the cartels would just move on? Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Text message. He pulled it out with trembling fingers. Another photo of Sarah, this one taken through her dorm room window. She was asleep now, completely vulnerable. Last chance, Elena said softly. Walk away now, and your daughter lives. Keep asking questions and she becomes part of the lesson. Marcus stared at the photograph until his vision blurred. Sarah's face, peaceful in sleep, framed by the window of what should have been the safest place in her world. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 11:47 p.m. 7 minutes ago. You're threatening my daughter. The words came out hollow, disbelieving. This was Elena, the woman who'd helped him pick out Sarah's 16th birthday present, who'd listened to him worry about teenage boys and college applications. You're threatening a 21-year-old girl who's never hurt anyone. I'm teaching you about consequences. Elena's finger traced one of the surveillance photos on the table. Something you never learned. Tell me, Marcus, in 3 years of drowning yourself in self-pity, did you ever once wonder what happened to the families caught in the crossfire of your weakness? He wanted to say yes, but the lie wouldn't come. The truth was uglier. He'd been too busy drowning to think about anyone else's pain. Elena seemed to read his silence. She pulled another photograph from the stack. A young woman, maybe Sarah's age, lying in a hospital bed. Tubes down her throat, machines keeping her alive. Maria Santos. Her father ran a legitimate trucking company that unknowingly transported cartel money. When your compromise forced El Chapo to restructure his routes, rival cartels assumed the Santos family was collaborating. Elena's voice carried the clinical detachment of a coroner reading autopsy results. They firebombed the family home. Maria was the only survivor. Severe brain damage from smoke inhalation. She'll never wake up. Marcus felt something cold spreading in his chest. Elena, please! And here's Miguel Herrera. Another photo, a man in his 50s, missing both hands. He was a dock worker who loaded our surveillance equipment into containers. When the operation collapsed, the cartels needed someone to blame for the security breach. They decided Miguel had been too helpful to federal agents. The photographs kept coming. Faces, names, stories of ordinary people crushed by the machinery of violence his carelessness had set in motion. A warehouse supervisor shot in front of his children. A translator's wife kidnapped and never found. A teenage informant discovered floating in San Diego Bay. Stop! Marcus's voice cracked. Please, Elena, stop! Did you stop to think about them when you were making those drunken phone calls? Did you consider the ripple effects of your self-indulgent breakdowns? She held up another photo, a funeral, dozens of people in black surrounding a small white casket. 8-year-old Rosa Martinez, wrong place, wrong time when the cartels came looking for her uncle. Marcus slid down the wall until he was sitting on the stained carpet. The weight of it all was crushing him. Not just the guilt, but the realization of how completely he'd failed to understand the scope of his actions. He'd seen his compromise as a personal tragedy, a moment of weakness that had cost him his partner and his career. But it wasn't personal at all. It was a stone thrown into still water, and the ripples had drowned strangers. You want to know the worst part? Elena gathered the photographs with careful precision. I tried to protect you. Even after I realized what you'd done, even after I understood that your weakness had condemned me to 17 hours of hell, I still tried to protect you. What do you mean? The official report, the story that made you a victim instead of a perpetrator. Elena's laugh was bitter as burned coffee. I spent 2 months in a cartel medical facility, recovering from injuries that should have killed me, and the first thing I did when I could speak again was contact my handler. Do you know what I told them? Marcus shook his head, though part of him already knew. I told them you were clean, that the leak came from somewhere else, that you'd fought bravely, that you'd tried to save me. Elena's eyes glittered with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. I let you become a hero in your own story because I couldn't bear the thought of destroying you completely. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. All these years believing he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control. And Elena had orchestrated that belief. She'd saved his reputation, his pension, his freedom to disappear into a Phoenix safe house instead of a federal prison. Why? He whispered. Because I loved you, you selfish bastard. The words came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep and painful. Because even after everything you'd cost me, I still couldn't bear to watch you face the consequences of your actions. Elena, but love has limits. She stood, towering over him in the pink neon light. And you've reached mine. His phone buzzed again. Another photo, Sarah, still sleeping. But now there was a shadow visible at the edge of the window. Someone standing just outside, watching. Choose, Elena said softly. Walk away now, or learn exactly how many innocent people are willing to pay for your education. Marcus's phone clattered to the floor, the screen cracking against the stained motel carpet. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence, and for a moment neither of them moved. Elena's ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a tectonic plate of understanding that changed the landscape of everything he thought he knew. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice carried no conviction. He was staring at the woman he'd loved, the partner he'd trusted with his life, and seeing a stranger. You wouldn't hurt Sarah. You're not that person. Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. I'm exactly that person. I became that person in a cartel medical facility while you were learning to drink your breakfast. She moved toward him, each step deliberate, predatory. You want to know what 17 hours of torture teaches you, Marcus? It teaches you that there's no such thing as innocent people. There are only people who haven't been tested yet. This isn't you. Marcus struggled to his feet, his back still pressed against the wall. The Elena I knew would never... The Elena you knew died in that warehouse. Her voice cut through his protest like a scalpel. She died believing her partner would come for her. She died thinking the man she loved was strong enough to save her instead of weak enough to cause her capture in the first place. But something in her words didn't sit right. Marcus had spent 3 years replaying that night, examining every detail through the lens of whiskey and self-hatred, and one truth had always remained constant. He'd tried to reach her. He'd fought through the chaos, taken 2 bullets, and crawled through that burning warehouse until blood loss had taken him down. I did come for you, he said slowly. I nearly died trying to reach you. After you'd already betrayed our position. Elena's voice remained steady, but something flickered behind her eyes, a micro-expression that lasted less than a heartbeat. Your heroic rescue attempt was just guilt management. Marcus pushed himself off the wall, his mind suddenly clearer than it had been in years. No, that's not right. If I was the leak, if my phone calls compromised the operation, then why were you in that warehouse at all? Why didn't Carlos Mendoza just ambush us at the safe house? Why the elaborate trap? Elena went very still. You're overthinking. Am I? Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, fragments of memory he'd suppressed because they didn't fit the narrative of his own guilt. Carlos knew my real name, you said, but he whispered it to you, not to me. Why would he tell you something I already knew? Unless... The pink neon light flickered, casting Elena's face in alternating shadow and light, and Marcus saw something he'd missed before. Fear. Actual fear, quickly masked but unmistakably real. Unless he was telling you something you didn't know, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. Unless he was revealing that your partner, Marcus Rivera, wasn't who you thought he was. You're spiraling again, Elena said, but her tone had lost its Arctic confidence. The guilt is making you paranoid. The guilt. Marcus repeated the words like he was tasting poison. 3 years of guilt that you helped construct. 3 years of believing I was responsible for your death, for the collapse of the operation, for all those innocent people in your photographs. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth written in the tension of her shoulders, the way she'd positioned herself between him and the door. You weren't the victim in that warehouse, Elena. You were the asset. The words hit the air like a physical force. Elena's careful mask finally slipped, and for a moment Marcus saw the woman he'd known, vulnerable, exposed, caught in a lie that had taken 3 years to construct. You're wrong, she whispered. The torture never happened. The scars, the limp, they're real, but they came later, after you'd made your deal with Carlos Mendoza. After you decided that the FBI was losing the war on drugs and picked what you thought was the winning side. Marcus felt a strange calm descending over him. I was never the leak, Elena. You were. That's not... You fed them my location. You told them which container I'd be in. But something went wrong, didn't it? Maybe you developed a conscience at the last second. Maybe you realized that watching your partner die was harder than you'd anticipated. Marcus stepped toward her and she backed away. So you tried to save me, and Carlos decided you were unreliable. That's when the punishment started. That's when you learned what real consequences look like. Elena's hand moved to something hidden beneath her jacket, but her voice had lost all its authority. Even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. Sarah is still in danger. The people watching her won't care about your theories. No, Marcus said quietly, but they'll care about this. He pulled out his phone, not the cracked one on the floor, but a second device hidden in his jacket pocket. The screen showed a recording app that had been running for the last 20 minutes, capturing every word of Elena's confession, every detail of her elaborate revenge plot. The one thing you never learned about me, Elena, Marcus said, is that I got sober to save my daughter, and a sober man never stops being a cop. Elena stared at the phone in Marcus's hand as if it were a loaded gun pointed at her chest. The recording app's red dot pulsed steadily, marking time like a heartbeat, and Marcus watched 3 years of carefully constructed lies crumble behind her eyes. You son of a bitch. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute betrayal. You've been recording since you walked in. Since I realized the woman who supposedly died to save me was somehow orchestrating my daughter's surveillance from beyond the grave. Marcus kept the phone steady, though his hands wanted to shake. Funny thing about being sober, Elena. It makes you paranoid about things that seem too convenient, like mysterious packages that arrive exactly when you're at your lowest point. Elena's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something raw and dangerous. You think you're so clever. You think you've figured it all out. I think you underestimated what 3 years of guilt can teach a man about analyzing his own failures. Marcus backed toward the window, keeping distance between them. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, Elena. Every detail, every decision, and the one thing that never made sense was why Carlos would bother with such an elaborate trap if he already knew everything about our operation. Maybe because he wanted to send a message, or maybe because he didn't know everything. Maybe he only knew what his asset had been able to tell him. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. You fed them intelligence for months, didn't you? Small things at first, shipment schedules, personnel movements, nothing that would compromise the larger operation, just enough to prove your value. Elena's silence was answer enough. But then something changed. Marcus continued. Carlos wanted more. He wanted the location of our surveillance equipment, our contact protocols, maybe even the identities of other federal assets. And you realized you were in too deep to say no. You don't understand, Elena started, but Marcus cut her off. I understand perfectly. You were always smarter than me, always 3 steps ahead. You saw which way the war was going and decided to be on the winning side when it ended. Except you didn't count on developing actual feelings for your partner. Marcus's voice softened despite everything. That's what went wrong that night, isn't it? When it came time to watch me die, you couldn't do it. Elena's hand was definitely on a weapon now, hidden beneath her jacket. So what if I couldn't? Look how that mercy worked out for me. You tried to warn me. In those final minutes before the ambush, you tried to abort the mission. I remember now, you kept suggesting we wait for backup, that something felt off about the intelligence. But I was so eager to prove myself, so desperate for a win after months of failure, that I overruled you. And Carlos decided I was unreliable. Elena's voice carried the weight of old pain. 3 years, Marcus. 3 years of rebuilding myself from nothing, of learning how to be the person who could survive in this world. And you want to destroy all of that with a recording? I want to save my daughter. Marcus felt something shifting in his chest. Not quite forgiveness, but something close to understanding. But I also want to save you. Elena laughed, and the sound was broken glass. Save me? I'm not the woman you fell in love with anymore, Marcus. That woman was weak. She let emotion cloud her judgment and nearly got herself killed for it. That woman was human. Marcus took a step toward her, ignoring the danger. This version, the one who threatens innocent girls to settle old scores, she's the weakness, Elena. She's what happens when you let trauma make your decisions. Don't. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. You have no idea what I've had to become to survive. Then tell me. Marcus held up the phone. This recording will destroy you if it gets out, but it doesn't have to get out. Tell me about Sarah. Tell me about the surveillance, about whoever you're working with now. Help me understand what you really want here. What I want. Elena's composure finally shattered completely. I want you to suffer the way I suffered. I want you to know what it feels like to be completely helpless while someone you love pays for your mistakes. I want you to carry that weight for the rest of your miserable life. And then what? After I've learned my lesson, after I've suffered enough, what happens to Sarah? What happens to you? Elena opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time since she'd walked into this motel room, she seemed uncertain. You haven't thought that far ahead, Marcus realized. This whole elaborate revenge plot, and you don't actually have an endgame. The phone in his pocket, the cracked one on the floor, buzzed with another text message, but neither of them moved to check it. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Marcus watched Elena's face cycle through emotions, rage, confusion, something that might have been grief. The pink neon light flickered again, casting shadows that made her look like a ghost of herself. I had an endgame, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I was going to make you choose, your life or hers, make you feel what I felt when I realized you'd never... She stopped, her hand trembling against her concealed weapon. When you realized I'd never what? When I realized you'd never loved me enough to be careful. The words came out like a confession torn from her throat. You were reckless, Marcus, always so damn reckless, charging into situations without thinking, making decisions based on ego instead of protocol. I spent months trying to protect you from your own stupidity. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. By feeding information to Carlos Mendoza, by trying to control the flow of intelligence. I thought I could manage both sides, keep you safe while giving Carlos enough to keep him from looking too closely at our operation. Elena's laugh was hollow. God, I was so naive. I actually believed I could play that game and win. The truth was worse than Marcus had imagined. Not betrayal born of greed or ideology, but a twisted kind of love that had tried to protect him by sacrificing everything else. Elena, the people who died because of the intel you gave Carlos? You think I don't know their names? Elena's voice cracked. You think I don't see their faces every time I close my eyes? But they were strangers, Marcus. You were... She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. I was what? You were supposed to be worth it. The admission seemed to break something inside her. You were supposed to be worth all of it. The compromises, the lies, the blood on my hands. But when Carlos finally had you in that warehouse, when I saw what my protection had really cost, I realized I'd been wrong about everything. Marcus looked at the woman he'd once loved and saw the weight of 3 years' worth of carefully constructed justifications finally collapsing. The torture wasn't punishment for betraying Carlos, it was punishment for betraying yourself. He didn't torture me. Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. That was my addition to the story. The scars are real enough, self-inflicted mostly. Physical pain seemed like appropriate penance for what I'd become. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of all the nights he'd lain awake imagining her suffering, the guilt that had driven him to the bottom of countless bottles. 3 years of guilt based on a lie. 3 years of guilt based on the truth, Elena corrected. Your recklessness did get people killed. Your ego did compromise the operation. The only lie was about who suffered the consequences. Marcus felt the weight of his sobriety pressing down on him. Not the burden of staying clean, but the clarity that came with it. For the first time in 3 years, he could see the situation without the distorting lens of alcohol or self-pity. You're right. I was reckless. I did make decisions based on ego. But Elena, what you did to manage that, it was worse than anything I ever did. Was it? Elena pulled her hand away from her weapon, suddenly looking exhausted. At least I tried to protect someone I loved. All you did was stumble around playing hero while better people paid for your mistakes. The cracked phone on the floor buzzed again, more insistently this time. Marcus glanced at it, then at Elena. Sarah. Sarah's fine, Elena said, but there was something hollow in her voice. She's always been fine. The surveillance, the photos, it was theater, a way to get you moving, get you engaged with the world again. But the shadow in the window, one of my people, taking pictures to send to you. No threat, just documentation. Elena slumped against the wall. I wanted you to feel helpless, Marcus. I wanted you to understand what it was like to love someone you couldn't protect. Marcus stared at her, processing this final revelation. There never was any danger. There is now. Elena's voice carried a note of something that might have been regret. Because this conversation, this recording, it's going to bring attention we can't control. The people I work with now, they don't tolerate exposure. Then we disappear, both of us. Take the recording and vanish before... Before what? Elena's laugh was bitter. Before you decide to be reckless again? Before your conscience gets more innocent people killed? She shook her head. I've spent 3 years learning how this world really works, Marcus. There's no running from it. There's only choosing which side of the violence you want to be on. There's a third choice, Marcus said quietly, his finger hovering over the phone's delete button. We can choose to stop. Elena stared at his finger poised over the delete button, her expression shifting through disbelief, hope, and something that looked dangerously close to the woman he'd once known. Outside, the desert wind rattled the motel's windows like skeletal fingers against glass. You delete it. Her voice was barely a whisper. After everything I've done to you? Marcus felt the weight of 3 years pressing down on him. Not just the guilt and the bottles and the sleepless nights, but the fundamental question that had driven him to this moment. What's the point of keeping it? To destroy you? To feel vindicated? He shook his head. I've been carrying poison for 3 years, Elena. I'm tired of it burning through my veins. The phone screen dimmed, then brightened again as a notification appeared. Sarah, probably wondering why her father hadn't answered her calls. The daughter who'd never been in danger, who'd been living her life while he'd tortured himself with imaginary threats. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to protect her from a phantom menace, he'd neglected the real relationship they could have been building. If I delete this, Marcus said, you disappear, tonight. You walk out of here and I never see you again. No more games, no more theater, no more using my guilt as a weapon. Elena's hand finally moved away from her jacket entirely. And if I refuse? Then I hit send, and we both deal with the consequences. Marcus met her eyes. Your choice. But either way, this ends here. She was quiet for a long time, studying his face in the motel's harsh fluorescent light. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an exhaustion that seemed bone deep. You know what the worst part is? For a moment there, when you were figuring it all out, I was proud of you. The old Marcus would have accepted my version of events without question. He would have drunk himself to death on guilt that wasn't even his to carry. The old Marcus did a lot of things badly. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, like a knot he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. But he also loved you enough to want you to survive this. Elena laughed, but there was no bitterness in it now. You always were better at forgiveness than I was at accepting it. She moved toward the door, then paused. Marcus? Yeah? Sarah looks like you. In the photos my people took. Same stubborn jawline, same way of holding her head when she's thinking. Elena's voice softened. She's beautiful. Don't waste any more time staying away from her. Marcus watched her hand hover over the door handle. Elena, the people you work with now will never know this conversation happened. She pulled out a small device, pressed a button. Signal jammer. Been running since I walked in. Your recording exists only on that phone in your hand. He stared at her. You planned for me to record you? I planned for you to be smarter than I gave you credit for 3 years ago. Elena opened the door, desert air rushing in to disturb the stale atmosphere of secrets and recriminations. Delete it, Marcus. Choose to stop. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of decision. Through the window, he watched her walk across the parking lot, not hurried, not looking back, just a woman disappearing into the Phoenix night like smoke dissipating in wind. His phone buzzed again. Sarah's text appeared on the cracked screen. Dad, I know you don't like to talk much, but I graduate next month. Would you maybe want to come? Marcus stared at the message, then at the recording app still running on his other phone. With deliberate precision, he pressed delete, watched the file disappear into digital nothingness. Then he picked up the cracked phone and typed back. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Outside, a car engine started and faded into distance. Marcus sat on the motel bed, surrounded by the debris of 3 years' worth of carefully maintained guilt, and felt something he'd almost forgotten existed, the possibility of tomorrow being different from yesterday. His hands didn't shake as he scrolled through Sarah's contact information, looking for her actual phone number instead of just responding to texts. His mouth felt dry, but not from craving alcohol, from the simple terror of talking to his daughter after years of hiding from her love. When she answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise, Marcus closed his eyes and chose to stop carrying ghosts. Sarah? It's your dad. I was wondering if maybe we could grab coffee sometime. I have some things I'd like to tell you. The desert wind settled, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Rivera felt like he might know how to sleep without dreams.